Something to understand when it comes to the sexual polarity quadrant and masculine feminine dynamics, dom sub dynamics, is the concept of pre-qualification versus earned qualifications. Now, one thing that I have to pinpoint and put out is this: in order to be a masculine dominant, you have to have the capacity to reward good behavior, right? So if your cup is too low to reward good behavior, then if you're taking a masculine stance, then you're going to be transactional, which means that you're going to have an inability to truly stretch the individual in a way that increases their pleasurable experience, and to do that consistently in a way that's going to improve the quality of their life and to take them further than they have a capability to take themselves. And also, if you take the feminine dominant stance, right, the feminine dominant stance, you're going to typically just be a user. You're going to use the individual. You're not going to be principled in the way that you interact with them in a way to where they feel reciprocated. So the thing to understand about a feminine dominant is you may have the dominance to give them a great experience, but that's typically going to be an experience based more off of a trauma bond than off of an experience of growth. Now, I'm not always going to say that a trauma bond is 100% wrong or that it's 100% bad. I think this is something that does get a bad rap in this day and age. You know, in all relationships or most relationships, there are going to be hardships that come with life because that's just the nature of reality. That's the nature of the beast. And if you have an inability to go through hardships with your partner, and when you're integrated and to go through hardships and then draw you closer together, then all the hardships that you experience throughout life are going to push you apart. So I'm not going to be 100% against the whole concept of trauma bonds. But what I will say is this: if you have an inability to reward good behavior, then you have an inability to be a masculine dominant. Now, when it comes to the sexual polarity quadrant, there is pre-qualification and then there is earned qualification. Now, what does this mean? That means that the foundation of sexual polarity based off of the sexual polarity quadrant, there has to be a foundation of intrinsic desire and intrinsic reward. And you can't truly operate out of intrinsic desire and intrinsic reward unless you are in an abundance mindset, right? And what does that mean? That means that for most women, if they go into survival mode, the first thing that's going to leave is going to be their capability or their ability to resonate with their internal desire to be sexually submissive. And that desire to be sexually submissive is going to fade from their conscious reality of how they view themselves and how they view the way that they just perceive reality. And then they're going to become transactional about sexuality. That's what's going to happen for most women. And for most men, they're going to perceive themselves from a position of not wanting love, not wanting relationships, not tapping into their internal feminine, repressing their anima. And they're going to be in a position where they do not desire love, they do not desire relationship, they do not desire truly to connect, and everything is just going to be nothing but sex. Now, the truth is this: when it comes to taking a masculine dominant stance, it can appear that way from the get-go, but you are training and teaching the person how to interact with you in a way that creates a desire internally, naturally, for you to be able to reward good behavior. Understand what I'm saying? So when you take a masculine dominant stance, something that occurs is this: you create intrinsic desire within the woman that you're dealing with on a sexual level. That intrinsic desire that you create causes sex to feel, at least on an 8 level of sexual attraction, as something that feels at least like an equivalent exchange. And by sex feeling like at least an equivalent exchange, it gives you the capability of having a pure, non-sexual connection that you share with that woman, where you don't feel pressured to invest in this woman non-sexually in order to have access to her sexually. Because if you feel the need to invest in this woman non-sexually in order to have access to her sexually, then you're taking a masculine submissive stance. You're not truly taking a dominant stance. You're taking a masculine submissive stance where you're truly trading the non-sexual for the sexual, which is going to blur the lines and corrupt the intrinsic desire to engage with her non-sexually and the intrinsic desire from her side to engage with you sexually. So when you take a masculine dominant stance as a man, her intrinsic desire and respect for you as a man makes it so that her following instructions isn't something that always has to be overly explained. Her following instructions isn't something that has to be compensated, and there doesn't have to be a conscious understanding, a logical perspective of what she's being compensated for. She desires to give up control. She desires to tap into desire. She desires to be in a submissive position with you based off of her attraction to you, her respect for you, your energy, and how you carry yourself. And by doing that, you're able to give an honest perspective in how you interact with her in rewarding good behavior, so that as she is getting with your program, you are able to reward good behavior. And by rewarding good behavior, what I mean is this: the things that you react to, the things that you respond to, those are going to be things that encourage you to genuinely desire to form a connection with this woman, to genuinely desire to form a connection. But this is the thing: in order for it to be genuine, you have to genuinely feel as if you do not need or have to invest these things in this woman in order to gain and or to maintain access to this woman sexually, or gaining or maintaining access to this woman sexually is not that big of a priority for you. So you got to understand what I'm saying on that point. There's pre-qualification versus earned qualification. And it comes off that foundation of being able to trigger a response of intrinsic desire and intrinsic reward to do the thing that strokes your ego. Now, the thing to understand about it is this: the submissive ego is attracted to this strength, right? The submissive ego is attracted to dominance. It's attracted to looking up to an individual as a pillar of strength, looking up to an individual as someone who has capacity to give them a great experience. And by looking up to them in that capacity, when they extend into the feminine submissive, they're malleable about the way that they give up control. So they're not seeking to control the way that they give up control. When you try to control the way that you give up control so that you can be reciprocated for what it is that you desire, you're taking a masculine submissive, transactional, and or cooperative stance. That's the masculine submissive, and that's prematurely integrated. And that means that neither one of you is going to fully be able to take a dominant stance, and neither one of you is going to be fully able to take a submissive stance. So submissive on submissive, it's really kind of like masculine submissive on masculine submissive. That's like the perspective of life partners, where you just say, okay, cool, well, we're going to trade the same exact thing to one another, and then we're either going to outsource these other aspects of this relationship so that our needs are going to be met, and both people may be outsourcing the same thing. And you say that on this one particular level of this interaction, this feels equal, and because this feels equal, we're just going to negotiate the rest of it. And that's a masculine submissive stance. That isn't a masculine dominant or a feminine submissive stance. So pre-qualification is when you take the risk of rejection, of interacting with the person up front on a level where your ego need is going to be met. Where your ego need is going to be met, but you do it in a way that subverts the expectation and causes the person to desire you for what it is that strokes your own ego. So what does that mean for a masculine dominant woman with a feminine submissive man? What that means is this: a masculine dominant woman is typically going to be a woman who is attractive, but at the same time, the way that she interacts with the man non-sexually is so powerful and so influential to where that man, without the guarantee of sex, still desires sex, but he enjoys dealing with this woman non-sexually more than he is pushing for the idea of having access to her sexually. So that means that he will be malleable in the way that he interacts with the woman non-sexually, getting on her program. And through the way he gets on her program, she is going to reward his good behavior with sexual dominance, which means that she's going to give him some good pussy. Now, one thing to understand about great sex is that great sex is about skill, but it's not always about skill. It's oftentimes about the energy dynamic when you're interacting with an individual, where the edging, the teasing, the pleasure denial, the orgasm control, these are things that where you're being stretched in your experience of taking a submissive stance. It increases your desire for what it is that you desire, but it also increases your desire to continue doing what you're doing, right? So like a man in the friend zone, right? A man in the friend zone is typically a man who is taking a feminine, submissive stance towards a woman. Now, why is it the friend zone? It's the friend zone because the way that woman is influencing this man to interact with her is not a way of interacting with her in which it's increasing her desire to engage with him sexually, right? Like I said, you can't take a masculine dominant stance if you lack the capability of having a natural desire within yourself to reward good behavior, because masculine energy is attracted to feminine energy. Submissive energy is attracted to dominant energy. So when you understand these things, a woman may be able to take a stance that appears masculine dominant, having men who are beta male orbiters, having men who are willing to invest their time and energy into her non-sexually just for the sake of the non-sexual. Now, what we have to understand is this: as a man, when you're taking a masculine dominant stance, you still have to be non-sexually desirable if you desire to integrate. If not, then you can keep things where they are. As a woman, you still have to be sexually appealing. Because if you're not sexually appealing as a woman and you're taking a masculine dominant stance, you may just be dealing with another man who's masculine and dominant, or dealing with a man who's masculine and dominant himself, who's doing an exercise in self-control. And through his exercise in self-control, if your own ego gets triggered by the fact that you don't feel sexually desired and that man is highly attracted to you, then it can easily create a scenario where when you feel triggered by not feeling desired for what men typically desire you for, you would then begin to pursue him sexually. And that subverts the dynamic, right? In the same way, as a man, if you are taking a masculine dominant stance, but you are unable to make yourself non-sexually appealing, then you may be dealing with a woman who's taking a masculine dominant or a masculine submissive stance herself, just on the premise of wanting nothing but sex. And if you feel triggered by the fact that you assume that every woman wants a relationship with you, or every woman wants to spend time with you non-sexually, that if she's non-sexually desirable herself, then you may begin to pursue her non-sexually while she is just being receptive to spending time with you sexually. So you have to have a capacity to reward good behavior, but they have to actually desire the reward. They have to desire the reward. It can't be somebody who only wants you on one level. And this is the difference between pre-qualification, right, and earned qualification. This is the difference. It's one of the primary differences between it. You have to be both sexually and non-sexually desirable. And the thing to understand about the masculine dominant is that you have to be in a situation where you're both sexually and non-sexually desirable. And the person has to desire both from you for them to be in a feminine submissive stance. But their priorities have to be in a position where they desire the thing that strokes your ego from a position of receiving the pleasure from giving up control more than they desire the reciprocation of what would stroke their own ego, or that desire for what would stroke their own ego will exceed their desire for what strokes your ego, to the point where they can either take a feminine dominant stance of bait and switching, like if you have a lot of inadvertent behavior. And something I see with a lot of women who want to take a masculine dominant stance, the dominant woman, the boss bitch, these different types of archetypes and caricatures, is that oftentimes women who try to take a masculine dominant stance, the main thing that men desire them for is sex, because all that they show about themselves is their sexual desirability. So the man, all he sees is that she's physically appealing, but her non-sexual desirability has never extended beyond her sexual desirability. So because her non-sexual desirability has never extended beyond her sexual desirability, a man may just be trying to bait and switch her. Right? A man may just be trying to be transactional. And the masculine submissive is not going to have it. The masculine submissive is survival mode. So they're not going to have enough within their cup, and they're not going to desire you intrinsically enough from a feminine stance for what strokes your own ego for them to be able to to be feminine towards that aspect of the dynamic, and to move forward in a way where they're malleable to the way that they interact with you to get with your program, so that it can naturally create a desire for you to want to reward good behavior. They're not going to have enough good behavior to reward because the masculine submissive is thinking about what's fair. So, like, let's say it's a masculine submissive woman. The masculine submissive woman, maybe a Topanga, she may have sex with you a couple times or a few times, or to do the bare minimum or less than what your program requires, but feel like she should be entitled. That's the nice girl. She feels like she should be entitled towards having access to you non-sexually and emotionally and socially and financially, because she feels like she's giving up her body to you. One thing to understand about the masculine submissive is that when it comes to the ego need of the other person, the masculine submissive is taking a dominant stance. So there's a lot of men who view themselves as dominant because they have a lot of money, right? Now, they may be dominant in the fact that they have to set a certain precedent or set a certain mindset where they aren't being malleable to the woman. They have to use their resources, emotional, social, or financial, and the validation that they're giving, the pleasure that they're giving, in order to encourage the woman to reciprocate them sexually. And a woman who's taking a masculine submissive stance is really in her dominant ego about what it is that she's doing sexually. So the masculine submissive woman, unless she's had maybe trauma or a lot of experience, or she's been like a sex worker or some form of prostitute, chances are she's going to have limited energy to put towards the actual sex. She's going to desire for sex typically to not last that long, to not be that dominant, to not be that stretching of her, because you have to understand that masculine energy stifles submissiveness. So when a woman is in her masculine submissiveness, she's really in her dominant sexual ego. She's going to be having sex with the man from a position of insecurity, desiring for the man to derive pleasure from her pussy so that she can feel validation from that, but also to be rewarded with emotional validation, social validation, or financial compensation. Right? And the masculine submissive man, he's seeking to receive a certain level of cooperation and sexual access based off of the emotional validation, social validation, and financial investment, and is not really seeking to receive that from a place of his true dominance, from a position of him being actually sexually desirable and someone who's respectable enough to follow. So that's where things can oftentimes get into pre-selection. That's the issue with the provider's mentality in a man. That's the issue with the woman who just accepts the mentality that sex is a chore that she needs to take care of with her man in order to keep him happy, right? This is my problem when it comes to people who share a traditional view of how relationships should work, because the traditional view is based on a survival mode that's not really going to work in this day and age. And it can work for some, but not in a society where there is an abundance of different things. There's an abundance of women who are seeking to have casual sex. There's an abundance of women who have their own money. And because of these things, it's going to be very difficult for there's an abundance of women who are actually operating out of the feminine dominance, right? Where they may bait and switch, where they may be a very emotional woman who is seeking to bait and switch a man or to derive ego gratification out of her actual sexual dominance, right? So a masculine submissive woman who is just giving a man pussy in exchange for what he's providing to her, she's not really even giving that man the best experience. That's why you notice a lot of these guys who are masculine submissives, a lot of the men who view themselves as quote unquote high value men because of their financial resources and social status, they most of the time when they're talking about women, most of those instances, they're going to be talking to women who are typically bimbos. They're going to be talking to women who are very attractive but lack a logical mentality. They're going to be talking to many women who are extremely pragmatic about their sexuality. But they're also women who are very attractive. They're going to be women who maybe some form of sex worker, some form of Instagram model. They're going to be women who are some form of lying, manipulative gold diggers. That's who they're going to be talking to and referring to in most of their content, because this is the type of woman who they're truly compatible with. Because a woman who is feminine submissive is not going to be really moved by a man's resources. A woman who is seeking to be feminine submissive is not going to be overly moved by a man trying to pour emotional energy into her. A woman who's seeking to be feminine and submissive is not going to be overly moved by a man's social status. She's going to be moved by a man's masculinity, his integrity, his sexual dominance, his leadership skills, his integrity. These are going to be the things that move a feminine submissive woman. So a man who is trying to leverage his resources in order to gain the appearance of a woman being feminine submissive with him, he's not really going to attract a woman who truly wants to take that stance in most instances. It is the same thing with the woman who's very attractive and she calls herself a sapiosexual or a demisexual, but really she wants a man, and she's trying to push her sexuality and her attractiveness to get a man who genuinely wants to spend time and talk to her non-sexually, who genuinely wants to engage with her non-sexually without developing her mindset to have a program that a man can listen to and learn from, take maybe her little bit more feminine version of it to teach that man levels of emotional intelligence that help him be more emotionally intelligent, to give him information and to develop a program that helps push that man forward with his finances. Because, what I'll say is this: when it comes to life, not every man's going to be dominant. Not every woman's going to be submissive, right? Not every man's going to be dominant. Not every woman's going to be submissive. There are going to be some submissive men, and that's their core polarity. And they're going to need to learn to be feminine submissive, but they need to learn to attract masculine dominant women. And there are some men out there who have a wife. That wife runs shit. That wife is putting that pussy on him. He may not be giving her vaginal orgasm from penetration, but she may even be loyal to him and just use toys. Or it may be a situation where he may be just a full-blown cuckold and she's out getting dominated, but she knows how to compartmentalize that sexual aspect and still prioritize his emotional needs and being there for him and stretching him through the experiences that she has and the things she shares with him from an honest perspective. And many masculine submissive men, they get triggered by the fact that there are men out there who can be much more submissive than they are and who are much more secure within themselves about the fact that they are truly submissive and who accept the role that they play. And it's in the same way that women oftentimes who are masculine submissive get very triggered by women who have free sex. They're like, why are you giving away the milk? Why would he buy the cow if the milk ain't free? That's a tricking mentality. That's a hoe mentality. That's prostitution in my mindset, right? The milk is free because there's going to be somebody who she's going to want to give that milk to. She may have a gentleman gigolo complex, right? And try to separate the men who she wants to give the milk to versus the men who she wants to buy the milk. But that doesn't mean that the milk isn't free for someone, because, and this may sound weird to say, but imagine that just using that type of logic, and this is what the masculine submissive man does as well. The traditional mindset man says, oh, why would you be sleep with the man who can't help you with your bills, right? That's what a provider's mentality, trick mentality man would say, right? And in these type of scenarios, what you have to understand is, imagine that if we're saying that why buy the cow if the milk is free, what if, and I'm not saying this is true, but what if there is a certain level of pleasure that is derived from the udders when the cow is being milked, if it is from someone who they're actually attracted to, it's someone who they actually like, they enjoy that process of this buildup of energy that we may call the milk cup theory, right? This energy that's called the milk, there's this buildup through the validation that they receive through maybe simps or whatever it is, that they need this to be poured out. If it gets overly full, it can lead to sexual polarity implosion. So as her cup gets full, she's going to want to express her true intrinsic sexual desire with someone, and typically that's going to be a dominant man. And let's say that it can cause irritation if this cow, this heifer, right, isn't milked when this gland that creates and builds up milk is a release that it can create a feeling of discomfort. So this needs to be released. See, there's an issue with some of these thought processes. And this is why I say that there's pre-qualification and there's earned qualification, right? There's pre-qualification and there's earned qualification. So something to understand is this: when it comes to pre-qualification versus earned qualification, you have to be attracted to someone who is showing feminine submissive energy towards you in order for you to be a masculine dominant. If your core polarity, and many women want to take this role of playing the masculine dominant. Some women can, most cannot. Things haven't changed, but so much for dominant men in this day and age. Things haven't really changed, right? Shout out to Alan Roger Curry. Rest in peace to Alan Roger Curry. That's the godfather of verbal seduction, Mr. Pedantic, Mr. Ramble, right? I really wanted to make some response videos. I made one, but I really wanted to make some more response videos before he passed away. And, I sent him some messages on Facebook, and he's responded to some of them and some comments too. And I ain't gonna lie, it kind of hurt me that Alan Roger Curry passed away, because he's really one of my biggest inspirations. And I had a philosophical disagreement that I really wanted to hear his take on before he passed away. We had a conversation in the comments about this particular point, and I've just been spent really some of the last few months just going over my arguments, so that when I made my response video, that it was going to be very clear and concise, and that I'd send it to him on Facebook, to his friends on Facebook, and try to get a response, because I want to get a response from Alan Roger Curry. If you have idols who are within the same field that you're in, and you agree with most of what they say, but you have a philosophical disagreement, it's like either they can prove you wrong and maybe you get better, or maybe they can listen to it and hear it and express that there's a caveat to what you're saying. But one thing I'll say is this: one thing he said is that in this day and age, in this society, the gap between the dominant man and the submissive man, or the alpha and the beta, has gotten a lot further in between, right? But he also said that the gap between the concept of the Madonna and the whore has become blurred. And this is something that I've been saying myself, but I had different words for it. I was saying it before I ever heard it from him. It wasn't a talking point that I stole from him, but the way that he expressed that aspect about the gap between the alpha male and the beta male becoming a bigger gap between is something that it really resonated with me when I heard him say it on a video. And the truth of the matter is this: it's a lot more difficult for a submissive man to find a woman who's truly masculine, who's truly taking a stance that can reward good behavior, right? Like when we were living in a society where relationships were predicated upon this need for survival, where the woman couldn't pay her own bills, where the woman couldn't have a bank account, where the woman couldn't vote, where the woman couldn't really have a real career, the woman had to take a masculine submissive stance. And I think when we understand this, there were many women who just accepted that. And really, through the acceptance of the masculine submissive, you can find peace and abundance within that. But we're living in a day and age of both sexual and emotional overstimulation. Just like a great example of the masculine submissive stance is to work a 9-to-5 job, or to work a plant job. Let's say you're working a plant job. There were many men and some women too, like maybe back in the World War II days and ages, where they would go to work at the plant job and they may just drink or take care of their family when they get home, but they might work that plant job for 40 years because it paid enough, it had good enough benefits for them to be in a position, and that during the Industrial Revolution, for them to be able to provide for their family, to get a pension, and to take care of their family. But nowadays, inflation is going up, and a lot of the plant jobs are being pushed out of the market. There's a lot of robotics coming in, technology that's coming in. Like I remember Andrew Yang, when he was running for president, he was talking about the tech tax, right? Because tech is pushing so many jobs out of the market. Just like, I remember when my father told me about when he was my age and a little bit younger than my age, that he could have just worked a job at a call center and made enough to pay his bills working a job at a call center, and that rent may have been, $400, $200 or something dollars back in the early mid 90s. And now, just over the last couple years, rent in a lot of places has gone from being maybe $700, $800. I'm in South Carolina, so keep that in mind. I'm in South Carolina, but I know people whose rent jumped from like $900 to like $1,500 over the last year or so. It's hyperinflation. People are getting back to a survival mode, but there's emotional and there's sexual overstimulation. So for the masculine submissive, if a woman was a virgin when she met her man, then she wasn't exposed to a high level of sexuality. If porn wasn't as easily accessible, if access to dominant men sexually wasn't as easily accessible, and if her social values and the boundaries about the structure in which she was brought up in within her cultural upbringing kept her away from being exposed to sexually dominant men, then a woman could take a masculine submissive stance and not feel a feeling of self-betrayal as much when it came to having sex with her husband. So she could take that masculine submissive stance. Sex could be a chore, but it could be a chore that she was open to. She wasn't exposed maybe to multiple vaginal orgasms from penetration, squirting, subspace, and all these different things. So having less than that didn't, it really wasn't a thing. It wasn't that big of an issue, right? A man could have worked a plant job without thinking too heavily, looking on social media every single day and every ad you see on YouTube telling you how you can be an entrepreneur and sell cryptocurrency and sell shit on Amazon and have your own business and be the architect and be sovereign over your own life in that capacity. So there's this emotional overstimulation of everyone wanting to seek a purpose with their career that extends beyond just what is feasible for the average person to be able to provide for themselves. Plus, entry-level jobs is getting to the place where a person can't really provide for themselves through these entry-level positions, and being able to go beyond those entry-level positions, it's the cost of living is going up and up and up to the point where you pretty much need a career in order to be gainfully employed. And the reason I'm saying this is this: we used to live in a day and age that was more so masculine submissive. Like, I don't know when the age of Aquarius really started or if it started at all, but I remember there is like a time, I think 2020, the year that COVID kicked off, where I think I fucked and I dealt with like 8 different Aquarians that year. It wasn't on purpose. And there's just this certain energy that Aquarians have, right? And I think a lot of this energy really permeates society, which is this desire to be a free spirit and this desire to cling to, like a moth to the flame, because I'm a Scorpio, right? And as a Scorpio, I'm a water sign, but at the same time, it's like I'm a fire sign of the water sign. Everything with me is about intensity. But oftentimes Aquarians love intensity, but they don't want accountability, right? And that's something that you may notice that can happen at times. And I think that society is at a place right now where there's a very heavy push towards being against the patriarchal mindset, right? A very big push towards being contrary to this paternal energy, to this masculine energy. Society is against masculine energy right now, and there's an attack on masculinity, right? And with this attack on masculinity, there's this push towards femininity and this desire to connect. But just because it's femininity doesn't mean that it's automatically good. People talk about toxic masculinity without understanding what toxic femininity is. So things are going extreme in the opposite direction. And this same type of hyper-socialist views are at times what led to things like, martial law and genocide in different aspects. Not all the time, because some of it was from hyper, dictatorships, but this hyper collectivist mentality of everyone needing to think the same thing, right? This hyper socialist mentality that many people have, it leads to a negative place. And part of the reason why I say this is because in this day and age, there's a very negative connotation against doing anything that you don't feel like doing in that moment, right? There was a time where a woman would understand that sex was a chore that she had to partake in. And with that chore, she wouldn't necessarily feel too negative about it. And there are some who did, but some who didn't, right? And with this taking place, in this day and age, the goalpost about what is considered abuse, the goalpost about what is considered sexual consent is something that is steadily moving to the point where anything below a woman having very enthusiastic consent, desiring to do it, consenting every single time, and wanting to have sex is considered coercion and pressure. So when we understand this, it becomes more of you can't even really compromise about sex anymore, right? You can't even really communicate with that. If you tell a woman, like, listen, my sexual needs aren't met. If you can't meet my sexual needs, then I have to leave. Then that can be interpreted by some people as a form of coercion, because you're putting pressure on a woman to do something sexually that she doesn't desire to do. And it's kind of really more so trying to shame men into either investing in a woman without expecting for his needs to be reciprocated for the average man who may be masculine submissive and is seeking to follow the principles of society, right? Or it's putting a man in a position where he pretty much has to just ghost a woman and leave her without explanation if his needs aren't met, or he's going to have to try to communicate with the woman and try to meet all of her emotional needs, where she may be in a low cup space and self-preservation like it's a bottomless pit, just to get the bare minimum or less than that of his sexual needs met, while steadily pouring out of his own energy. And this is something that eventually may lead to a very negative place within society. And it's a similar thing when it comes to men with careers. It's a similar thing that comes with that. And I just wanted to take some time within this conversation to break down masculine submissiveness. That masculine submissive age was based on survival mode. They understood that in order for shit to work, they had to be able to do what they had to do to make that marriage work, because there would be ostracization, or they would be ostracized by their culture, by their environment, by their community. If they went through a divorce, they would be ostracized maybe by their family, right? They maybe didn't even get to choose their partner off of a certain level of attraction, right? They had to choose their partner. They didn't get an extended period of time to vet the person, right? They had to do a much quicker courting process, right? And see if they liked the person, see where they were going. The man would take the woman on dates to show that he had a capacity to be a provider, right? Which was laying a foundation for transactional sex. And that's just how things worked. But nowadays, a woman can have her own money. So I do think that one aspect of the second wave of feminism was many women wanted to have the freedom to fuck who they wanted. And they would rather work and make their own money than to fuck someone who they aren't sexually attracted to for the rest of their life, under the pressure and fear of being ostracized by society if they were found out to be adulterous, just for the sake of survival. They would rather provide for their own survival. And this is one reason why I'm not really against feminism, right? This is one reason I'm not against it. But one thing that I will say is that for the people who aren't seeking to be in an abundance mindset, meaning the feminine submissive or the masculine dominant, it's going to be very difficult for them. Like the feminine dominant men in the society right now are in a position where the tactics and the strategies that they use to gain access to women sexually are starting to come down on them hard, right? Like lying about a relationship or wanting a relationship to have sex with a woman, eventually they might try to make that a charge, right? I heard that up in New York, I may be wrong, but I heard they were trying to make having sex with a woman because you thought that because she thought that you were a celebrity, seeing that as rape, right? It's a lot of different things going on, right? But at the same time, it's the feminine dominance, but the toxic femininity, the female's feminine dominance, is something that is being given a complete free pass. So, a woman can agree to be monogamous and cheat on her man, and it's his fault, right? And a woman can lie about being married and have sex with another man, and it's not her fault, right? She can lie about being married and nothing's going to happen to her for that, right? A woman can lie about having an STD. Well, maybe in some instances a man may be able to sue her, like if it's herpes or something, he might be able to sue her with assault charges or something like that. But many things are being decriminalized, right? And right now one fight that's going on is that the conservatives are seeking to make it illegal and to consider it sexual assault for a trans individual to sleep with someone who is cisgendered, and to not inform them of the sex that they were born as, right? And the damn the leftists, the social justice warriors, the liberals, they're fighting against it, saying they shouldn't have to tell you shit. And I'm like, man, that's crazy. And they're also pushing to make it, and I think it may already be, but it's like a hate crime if you find out that the person lied to you and you kill them or you beat their ass. And I'm like this. If you lie to somebody about your gender identification, or you don't tell them the truth and you get harmed, I don't feel sorry for you. I'm going to be completely honest, right? I have no issue with the lifestyle that you live. I don't think that lifestyle is 100% a choice. How you identify, how you view yourself, how you feel about yourself internally, that's a mental thing, that's an emotional thing. But there are people who were born in a position where pretty much before they were able to read or write, they already had an attraction towards the same sex. So I don't think it's a situation where that's just, that's the lifestyle that they choose. Some conservatives try to take it too far with that, as if there aren't people. But I will say that premature integration can lead people to a place where, because they're so far removed from what it means to be masculine, or what it means to be feminine, or what it means to carry themselves in a way that is attractive to the opposite sex from a perspective of understanding sexual polarity, that they just push themselves to a place where, like, let's say a man is emotionally overstimulated to the point where every woman he comes across who is feminine, she can't be attracted to him. So he needs a man who is masculine, or a woman who is masculine, so that they can actually have some polarity and be compatible. And that's something that occurs, right? And I think that's something that happens with a lot of artists too, right? Like my favorite artist, like, of all time is Frank Ocean. Like, hands down, my favorite artist is Frank Ocean. I've been listening. He's been my favorite artist for like 11 years now. He's just hands down my favorite musician. I love Tyler, the Creator. Tyler, the Creator was, part of the reason I got into making music, right? I love Steve Lacy. I'm supposed to be dropping, I was supposed to drop it, but the video was acting up as I was trying to edit it. But when it comes to Steve Lacy, I believe he's pansexual or bisexual or something like that. He is one of my favorite artists, hands down. I love him, right? And I think that when it comes to premature integration, the emotion, the femininity, and this balance between femininity and masculinity that creates this feeling of androgyny is something that creates some of the best artistic works that are known to man. So I'm not somebody who is against these things at all, but I will say that it's hard for me to look at this hyper push towards this moving goalpost of consent culture, and then to turn around and say that a person shouldn't make sure that an individual is consenting to know what sex that they were born as. I don't think that's right. And I think that should be considered rape. I don't think that somebody should kill the person, but you do not know how somebody's going to react if you do them like that. Like, if you take advantage of and rape a person, if they kill you, shit, it's your fault. It is what it is. If you try to steal the pussy and she pull out a gun and pop a cap in your ass and peel your muffin cap back blue, I don't feel sorry for you, right? And in the same way, I can't be but so mad at men in the same position, but it's just that there is this push towards villainizing anything that is masculine, villainizing anything that is overtly and directly dominant. And this is why I'm such a fan of talking about things the way that I talk about it. It's another reason why I love Alan Roger Curry, because he would speak about using mode 1 as a way of avoiding certain Me Too situations and understanding the climate and the day and age that we live in. And I think that's great. But this emotional overstimulation is also something that leads to men being in a situation where, because they're being told that, I want a man who's in touch with his feminine side. No, you have to be able to integrate. My personal opinion, I'm not sure if Jung taught it this way, right? But I'm big on Jungian psychology. I believe you should integrate your shadow before you're seeking to integrate your anima. Because if you try to integrate your anima first, you can easily become prematurely integrated and then be a man who's emotional, overly emotional, and then always wondering why women aren't attracted to you, right? Always wondering why women don't fuck with you the long way. Because the women who are feminine, they're not attracted to you being feminine because you're stepping on their toes. And then you're attracting women who are masculine. And then these masculine women, they may be masculine-submissive women, right? With the core polarity of truly desiring to be feminine. So because they can't get to that abundance mindset place with you, it becomes difficult. And then then eventually when you choose feminine as your primary mode, then you may be feminine dominant for a while, but after you burn out, then you start to go into the feminine submissive. After you go into the feminine submissive, eventually you reach a place of what happens at the peak of the feminine submissive. At the peak of the feminine submissive is typically going to be, cuckoldry, right? Penetrative orgasms, right? Shifting your mindset and your perspective to pick up the program of the person who you're with, worship, right? These are things that come with the feminine submissive. And when you lead with that mentality as a man, oftentimes you're going to attract certain types of women, right? And when you realize that most women you come across, their core polarity is going to make them unable to truly take a masculine dominant stance, eventually you're going to be like, man, these women can't really lead me. Most of these women can't really lead you because that's not what's in them on a core polarity level. So you're just going to choose a man. Because a man has a dick. If you tap into the feminine submissive enough, especially as your core polarity, as the core role within the sexual polarity you're trying to walk out of, eventually that's going to lead to either a cuck queen fetish. A lot of men may do that, be in polyamorous relationships, bisexuality, and, being penetrated to the point of orgasms, right? This is something that occurs. And a lot of women, they're not in an abundance mindset and they're not receiving orgasms, right? And because they're not receiving orgasms, they're taking a masculine stance towards sexuality where they're being transactional about access to them sexually. So when they meet a woman who is, wanting to emotionally connect with them and wanting to talk to them and invest in them, then she's pouring enough energy into her while also not truly stretching her because she doesn't have as high of a natural capacity for dominance that it makes her comfortable. And through that comfort, she'll be with another woman. Now, I'm not saying that every single woman who is a lesbian is a woman who's not truly lesbian. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that. There are some women who, as soon as they started experiencing attraction, they were experiencing attraction to the same sex. There were men who, as soon as they started experiencing attraction, they were experiencing attraction to the same sex. I am not talking about those people, but I think that there are a lot of people, like if you ever study Kinsey's scale, right? And I got my own scale for this as well. I got my own scale for it as well. But if you ever study Kinsey's scale, most people probably aren't going to be someone who's 100% heterosexual, because most people aren't going to be 100% dominant or 100% masculine or 100% submissive or 100% dominant, right? That's not the case. Most people aren't going to be 100%. Right? But you have your primary thing and you need to walk out your primary thing. And when we're living in this day and age of a high level of premature integration, a high level of this androgyny culture, this hyper push against dominance, this hyper push against masculinity, then it takes some people who just feel ostracized and outcast. They start to heavily resonate and then take a martyr perspective and then take this rejected perspective to where they identify with the people who they view as outcasts, who are truthfully people who are in a privileged class when it comes to how they're viewed and treated within society as a whole in the current climate, right? And these are all things that correlate to one another. And most of my videos are called Blurred Pill Rants. And if you notice the order of things I just said, right, I consider myself a blurred. Blurred culture does at times have a lot of overlap with the social justice warrior narratives and political leanings and liberal leanings, because most blurs were at some point outcast, but now blurs are starting to somewhat get pushed more and more into the mainstream. There's the blurred connection, something I need to make a video on soon. And in a lot of these scenarios, because of this correlation to being the rebel with a cause who's against the social norms, the blurred community is going to have a lot of overlap at times with the LGBT community. And I'm not against the LGBT community. I support people's choice to live the lifestyle that they want to live. But I do understand that there's something called overstimulation. There's sexual overstimulation, right? If you want to take a masculine dominant stance, getting overstimulated in your submissive sexual ego is something that will cause you to become duplicitous, to where if the masculine dominant stance that you seek to take is one with an individual who's feminine and submissive towards you, then you may be seeking to receive dominance from an individual before establishing your own dominance, right? You may develop a gentleman gigolo complex, because if you experience pleasure from an individual on such a high level that someone who you couldn't get with their program, because maybe they had some very severe mental issues, some very bad issues, they're a very toxic individual, then internally you're still going to have the desire to be submissive, and it's going to cause the individual who you view as long-term material to be someone who's more so like just this gentleman gigolo, good girl, bad girl, Madonna whore complex, duplicitous mentality type of situation that does oftentimes hurt relationships in this day and age. And really, to be integrated is to be able to have both in the same package. But the thing about having both in the same package is this: if you want to have the primary focal point being on the dom sub dynamics, then you have to accept what comes with that. If you want the primary focal point to be on the masculine feminine dynamics, then you have to understand what comes with that, right? So if you primarily want to have the gentleman, and then you want that to turn into if you want that to start as the gentleman and then to turn into the gigolo, then that means that it probably benefits you to not have a lot of sexual experience, because if you would experience sexually dominant men who didn't have a program, didn't have a good mentality, but were simply men who lacked emotional discipline and who were very toxic, then you're going to get bored and you're going to get very turned off by a man who is very principled but not very dominant, right? It's going to lead to duplicity. You're probably going to cheat on that man and do him dirty until you reach a place where you burn out, and now you're in a survival mode, and now you're seeking to get the leftovers, right, or to be the leftovers, right? If you're seeking dominance first, then you probably need to be able to find someone who's masculine and dominant and get with their program. But if you want dominance, then you need to be able to take and accept certain things that come with dealing with a dominant individual, right? Which means that they're probably not going to want to wait to have sex. Like if you're a woman and you want to deal with a dominant man, he's probably not going to want to wait to have sex with you, right? So that means that if you expect this man to lead off being overly investing when it comes to emotional validation, social validation, and financial investment, but you want a dominant man, you're setting yourself up for failure, because typically this means that you're going to try to attract a person who's probably going to love bomb you, to be completely honest. So that's why I talk about integration, right? Because, I don't believe in leading with the full package. You start with the role that you want to play. You walk through the role that you want to play within the sexual polarity quadrant. And then there's the pre-qualified and then the earned qualification, right? And the pre-qualified, you make sure that what it is that you want to do from a dominant stance and from a masculine dominant stance is something that the person intrinsically desires and enjoys. And then you also carry yourself in a way where you can handle the power and responsibility that comes with being masculine dominant, to reward good behavior and to give them the opportunity and the ability to reward the opportunity and the ability to also desire you non-sexually as a man, and vice versa for women, right? So what I wanted to talk about was pre-qualification versus earned qualification, my thoughts on this day and age, as well as talking about, how premature integration can lead to alternative lifestyle. It's Coach Brody. I'm out.